Harbin, Manchuria, once known as the Paris of the Far East, as its close proximity to what was once Russia gave the city a unique European flavor. Today, Harbin is primarily a manufacturing center, and its 3 million inhabitants work hard to put specific horrors of the past behind them. And those horrors have a name: Unit-731.
Okay guys, things are going to get extremely dark and unsettling today. We're going to briefly go over one of the most disturbing events and time periods during the last century. If not one of the darkest things in human history, really. It's definitely up there in the scale of horrific and nightmarish atrocities committed by humans. So if you're squeamish about pain, torture, war crimes, or just awful things in general, you might want to skip this one. So consider that a fair warning. As you might have surmised from either the title or the thumbnail, today's topic is Unit-731, the covert Japanese biological and chemical weapons testing and research facility that was in operation between 1935 and 1945. Quite honestly, I was surprised to receive any requests for this topic at all, because after researching it and looking into it myself, I would classify it as more of a terrible historical event than a mystery per se, like I normally prefer to cover. Usually I get requests for missing persons, unsolved murders, UFO sightings, just strange mysteries in general, things like that. But for some reason, people want to see a video on Unit 731, and a few want to see something called Camp 22 in North Korea, so might do something on that eventually also. If you're familiar with the atrocities and the barbaric medical experiments that were carried out by the Nazis during World War II, then you could consider this to be very comparable. There's no shortage of people out there, however, that actually consider Unit 731 to be much worse. Not in terms of the number of victims per se, but rather in the specific experiments and the details of the atrocities themselves. I'm not going to weigh in on that at all because, in my opinion, they're both examples of just how cruel and disgusting and inhumane that we can be to each other given the right circumstances. So the things that happened in this nightmarish place are literally some of the absolute worst things that a human being could do to another human being. Some of this includes vivisection, which is basically a dissection or an autopsy while the subject is still alive, and in almost every case without any type of anesthetic whatsoever. Other things include exposing people's bare limbs to sub-zero temperatures until it freezes, so they could study the effects of frostbite and hypothermia in order to treat their troops better if they're exposed to those kind of conditions. Intentionally infecting people with diseases like the plague and anthrax to study the effects of it, injecting things into the veins of people like salt water and horse urine, boiling people alive, and even placing people in high pressure chambers for no other reason seemingly than to see how much pressure a human being could survive before they died. So if you're still here, we're about to get into the specifics, so this really is your last chance to leave. Okay, so there's a lot of sources in the description here if you really want to look into any of this kind of stuff further, but I'd like to get through this video as quickly as possible, frankly, so I'll just start off with one of the shorter articles that was sent in. I know lately we've been drifting away from the article readings or article review type stuff that we used to do and a lot of you guys like to see, but we're going to follow that format again for this video at least. Okay, so this is an article from Today I Found Out with the headline, World War II Horror Files, Unit 731. At the dawn of World War II, although biological and chemical weapons had been used previously in warfare, little was known of precisely how they worked on the human body. Curious, certain Japanese researchers in its Army Unit 731 conducted a series of indescribably cruel experiments, testing the limits of the human body when subjected to harsh conditions, poisonous substances, and lethal diseases. And that's putting it lightly, trust me. There's a few sources in the description that I just didn't even want to cover here. Quite honestly, I'm purposely trying to use the least horrific and disturbing images available, but the really terrible ones are out there, and some of them are even in those sources I listed below. It's the stuff of nightmares, so just be prepared for that if you plan on checking out the description. So, history of Unit 731. Building from the ashes, literally, of a previous program, the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kuomintang Army, Unit-731 for short, was authorized in 1936. Bases were established at various places in China occupied by Japan during the Second Sino-Japanese War, including at Pingfang and Helsinki. Referring to their victims as maruta, meaning logs, the researchers experimented on apparently anyone they could get their hands on. Chinese, Russians, Koreans, Mongolians, Pacific Islanders, other Southeast Asians, and even a few American prisoners of war all fell victim to the doctors at the camps. Taking the scientific method to new lows, the researchers in Unit 731 conducted a variety of experiments. So, from what I understand, the story to explain this place to the people either living in the immediate vicinity or just the existence of it in general is that it was a lumber mill, even though the official cover story for Unit 731 was that it was a disease prevention and water purification facility. I've seen several claims that they were telling people that it was a lumber mill, or at least that there were rumors going around that it was a lumber mill. And so in some twisted, demented, sick sense of humor, that's why they referred to these unfortunate human test subject victims as logs, or marutas. Victims were purposely infected with fatal, contagious diseases like the bubonic plague, so researchers could learn exactly how the diseases affected the human body. Because they feared that decomposition, which begins immediately once a person dies, might corrupt tissue, they dissected their victims alive. Likewise, because they worried that drugs might blemish their findings, the victims were given no anesthetic. Rather, they were vivisected while fully conscious of what was happening. Just imagine how completely horrific this would be to experience. Here's a section from Wikipedia to further illustrate how unimaginable some of these activities were. Prisoners had limbs amputated in order to study blood loss. Those limbs that were removed were sometimes reattached to the opposite sides of the body. Some prisoners had their stomachs surgically removed and the esophagus reattached to the intestines. Parts of organs, such as the brain, lungs, and liver, were removed from some prisoners. Imperial Japanese Army surgeon Ken Yuasa suggests that the practice of vivisection on human subjects, mostly Chinese communists, was widespread even outside of Unit 731, estimating that at least 1,000 Japanese personnel were involved in the practice in mainland China. The scientists wanted to learn the limits of the human body, and so conducted a number of tests on their victims' arms and legs. Sometimes the limbs were frozen and thawed in order to study how frostbite and gangrene developed. At other times, limbs were cut off and sewn back onto the other side of the body. In a few experiments, when the limbs were removed, researchers just observed the blood loss. Many victims had all or part of their organs removed, and some even had organs detached, then reattached in unique ways nature never intended. Experiments were also conducted with high pressure, poisonous chemical exposure, centrifuges, burning, blood infusions from animals, burying, and x-rays. Of course, since the purpose of these tests was to determine how much a body could withstand, the experiments would continue until the test subject was dead. It is not known how many victims fell prey to these type of tests. However, estimates of the deaths at Pingfang, called by some the Auschwitz of the East, range from 3,000 to 12,000. Victims included women and men, as well as children and even babies. One of the fruits of Unit 731's labor was the development of bombs capable of delivering anthrax and the bubonic plague. These were tested in various places throughout China. In addition, fleas infected with the plague were dropped from airplanes in Manchuria, as well as the Chinese cities of Changde and Ningbo. Furthermore, ponds and wells were seeded with typhoid, cholera, and dysentery. Estimates of Chinese dead from these various experiments go as high as 200,000. As unimaginable as these details and events are, one of the most shocking aspects of this piece of history is how it was handled by the Allies. I'm sure the knowledgeable and well-versed researchers in the audience here are familiar with Operation Paperclip, and the secret deal that the Allied powers made with the Axis war criminals in exchange for their research and data. But we'll conclude here with a very brief synopsis for the viewers that aren't familiar with it. At the end of the war, Unit 731 scientists destroyed much of the evidence of the program. According to reports, however, some infected test animals were released. It is believed that at least 30,000 people died from the plague in the Pingfang area within just the first 3 years after the war. Like the German rocket scientists and engineers who were folded into military and other governmental programs at the end of World War II through Operation Paperclip, Unit-731 scientists were given immunity from prosecution, and their atrocities were covered up in exchange for exclusive access to their findings. And there you have it. For the first time during one of these videos, I'm at a loss for what to say. I do want to remind everyone to be respectful in the comments. I mean, this is some seriously dark stuff. Like with most stories, there's a lot of information that could have been included here, but to be frank, this isn't exactly the type of story that I prefer to research or make videos about. Really though, I barely scratched the surface of how bad this stuff is. I did tell you guys that I will make a video and discuss articles on anything that you want to see. So yeah, I brought it on myself. But really my favorite thing to cover here is mysteries and perplexing stories that are still unsolved. You know, things like that. Now that being said, I have to reluctantly tell you that if you really want to see another video that goes over this stuff in more depth, I will do it, but I think I'll have to see more than just 5 or 6 requests for it this time. So I'm sorry to leave you guys on such a dark and unsettling note here. I hope I was able to tell enough of the story to explain what happened, how it went down, without sugarcoating it too much. I can guarantee that I didn't exaggerate it, so I'm not worried about that. On a different note, I have some other videos coming out soon that I am excited about, including a special project that I worked on with a brilliant viewer that has done a ton of work and research into the MH370 mystery. I was so impressed with his research and theories that we decided to put our heads together and try to release this video that conveys his ideas and his point of view on how he sees things after looking into the event so deeply. So keep an eye out for that video. It's going to be a good one, I predict. And we have a few other regular viewer requested videos coming out soon too, so don't forget to check back. I will see you guys then. Peace.